The Orléanists were a French right-wing faction which arose out of the French Revolution. It governed France 1830–1848 in the July monarchy of King Louis-Philippe I. It is generally seen as a transitional period dominated by the bourgeoisie and the conservative Orléanist doctrine in economic and foreign policies. The chief leaders included Prime Minister François Guizot. It went into exile during the reign of Emperor Napoleon III and collapsed with the establishment of the Third Republic in 1870. It took its name from the Orléans branch of the House of Bourbon, who were its leaders. The faction comprised many liberals and intellectuals who wanted to restore the monarchy as a constitutional monarchy with limited powers for the king and most power in the hands of Parliament. Orléanists were opposed by the more conservative Bourbon faction, who wanted the heirs of Louis XVI restored to the throne with great powers. Both Orléanists and Bourbons were opposed by Republicans who wanted no king at all. Origins. During the early period of the French Revolution, Louis-Philippe Joseph, Duke of Orléans, who disliked King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, naturally assumed the position of a spokesman of the liberal royalists. It was a short step from this position to the attitude of liberal candidates for the throne, which Philip's son Louis-Philippe eventually would achieve. The Orléanists aimed politically to find a common measure for the monarchical principle and the rights of man, as set forth by the revolutionary leaders in 1789, and the princes of the branch of Orléans became the advocates of this attempted compromise. The elder Bourbon branch was prepared to grant a Charter of Liberties or Constitution, but insisted that they ruled by divine right, and conferred these liberties on their subjects of their own free will. The Bourbons' feudal language offended many Frenchmen, who concluded that rights granted as a favor were always subject to revocation as a punishment. Therefore, those of them who considered a monarchical government as more beneficial to France than a republic, but who were not disposed to hold their freedom subject to the pleasure of one man, became either Bonapartists who professed to rule by the choice of the nation, or supporters of the Orléans princes who were ready to reign by an original compact, and by the will of the people. The difference therefore between the supporters of the elder line, or Legitimists, and the Orléanists became profound, for it went down to the very foundations of government. French Revolution. The first generation of Orléanists were swamped in the turmoil of the Revolution. Philippe himself, who under the Republic had assumed the name Philippe Égalité and voted for the king's execution, was nonetheless guillotined himself in 1793. Despite this setback, according to Albert Sorel, the Orléanists subsisted under the First French Empire, and resurfaced when the revival of liberalism overthrew the restored legitimate monarchy of Louis XVIII and Charles X. Restoration. After the restoration of the Bourbons, the liberals were identified with the Orléanists, who rejected the legitimism of the elder branch as well as Bonapartism, which in their view was essentially democratic Césarism, an equal submission of all men to one despotic ruler, as equality before the law and in social life, which had been far dearer to Frenchmen of the revolutionary epoch than political freedom, seemed secured. The next step was aiming as political freedom. This happened under the guidance of men who were Orléanists because the Orléans princes seemed to them to offer the best guarantee for such a government. The liberals who were Orléanists found their leaders in men eminent in letters and in practical affairs: François-Pierre Guillaume Guizot, Adolphe Thiers, Achille Charles L'Écoute, Owen Victor, Duc de Broglie and his son Jacques-Victor Albert, the banker Jacques Lafitte and many others. When the July Revolution of 1830 resulted in the downfall of the elder Bourbon branch, the Orléanists stepped in. Louis-Philippe, Duke of Orléans, who became king, marked a profound change by assuming the title of a King of the French. The Orléanists, in their dislike of divine right, on the one hand, and their fear of democracy, which they were convinced would result in Césarism or a return to Bonapartism, turned for examples of a free government to Britain. a monarchy governing constitutionally based on parliamentary representation of the middle classes. They endeavored to establish the like in France under the name of a juste milieu, via media between absolutism and democracy. The French equivalent for the English middle-class constituencies was to be a pays legal of about 250,000 of voters by whom all the rest of the country was to be virtually represented. Guizot expounded and carried out this doctrine with uncompromising rigor. The Orléanist monarchy became so thoroughly middle-class that the nation outside of the pays legal ended by regarding the government as a privileged class less offensive, but also a great deal less brilliant, than the aristocracy of the old monarchy. Later history. Second Republic. The Revolution of 1848. Partly due to errors of conduct in individual princes and politicians, but mainly to the resentment of those excluded from the pays legal, swept the Orléanist party from power after 18 years. The Orléanists indeed continued throughout the Second Republic and the Empire to enjoy a marked social and literary prestige, on the strength of the wealth and capacity of some of their members, their influence in the Académie Française and the ability of their organs in the press, particularly the Revue des Deux Mondes, the Journal des Débats, and the papers directed by E. Hervé. Second Empire. During the Second Empire, which evolved from the Second Republic when Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, its president, declared himself in the tradition of his uncle to be Emperor of the French, the discreet opposition of the Orléanists, exercised for the most part with infinite dexterity and tact, by reticences, omissions, and historical studies in which the empire was attacked under foreign or ancient names, was a perpetual thorn in the side of Napoleon III. Yet they possessed little hold on the country outside a cultivated liberal circle in Paris. Third Republic. When the Second Empire was swept away by the German War of 1870 to 1871, the people, in disgust at the Bonapartists and its fear of the Republicans, chose a great many royalists to represent it in the assembly which met in Bordeaux on 12 February 1872. This enabled President Adolphe Thiers, himself an Orléanist, to impose the Third Republic on the unwilling majority of the assembly. Orléanists and Legitimists cooperated to expel Thiers from power on 24 May 1873. After this, the Orléanists sought a fusion with the Legitimists to strengthen the royalist cause. As far back as 1850, Guizot had thought of proposing a fusion, but under the condition that the Comte de Chambord would desist from claiming rule by divine right. When a fusion was arranged in 1873, it stood on quite another footing. After exchanging notes and conferences in committee rooms and drawing rooms, Philippe, Comte de Paris, the representative of the Orléanists, sought an interview with Henry, Comte de Chambord at Frosdorf, stating that he came not only to pay his respects to the head of his house but also to accept his principal. However, no final agreement was reached. Republican gains in the elections of 1876 and the crisis of 16 May 1877 ended the royalist dominance. In 1883, the death of the Comte de Chambord ended the elder Bourbon branch and left the Comte de Paris as head of the royal house of France. However, the party ceased to exist as an independent political organization, as many supporters progressively rallied to the Republic, while radical right-wing groups, particularly Action Française, espoused the House of Orléans as the only way to rescue France from what they perceived to be the corruption of the Republic. Although the Orléanists were given a new vitality, the initiative passed to other organizations who, although sincere monarchists, also had other agendas. The Orléanist cause ceased to be that of moderation between the extremes of the Bourbons and the Republicans. Fifth Republic. Under the Fifth Republic, Presidents Valéry Giscard d'Estaing and Jacques Chirac have both been classed on the Orléanist tradition of the three French right-wing families, identified by historian René Raymond. Orléanist principles of succession. Orléanist claims follow these principles. The crown descends to males born in the male line of Hugh Capet. The succession normally passes by primogeniture in the male line. Only children born of legal marriages conforming with the canon law of the Catholic Church are dynasts. The sovereign or head of the house must be Roman Catholic. The sovereign or head of the house must be French and inherit succession rights through a dynast of French nationality. Rules of succession to the crown are governed by the constitution or laws of the realm. It is this rule that separates the Orléanist rule from the legitimist one. List of Orléanist claimants to the French throne since 1848.